joining us once again on Talk and Fight for another episode of The Scoop featuring the champ, Bola Ray. And champ, what do you have lined up for us today?
Today, I think we're doing a question and answer scenario. So,
All right.
we're going to put it out there. Questions.
Do I have any questions? Or does Eric have any questions? Is that what you're asking?
That's exactly what I'm asking.
Oh, fair enough.
Nothing like
Catch you
putting
by
you on,
surprise.
nothing like putting you on the spot.
Sure, man. How did you morph? Well, I think of a good one. How did you morph from a track star to a boxing star?
Uh, that was nothing shy of a hissy fit. I I was attempting to qualify for the '92 Olympic Games, and I think I may have gone to four meets, and not just didn't qualify, I didn't come close to qualifying. And after putting so much work into that calendar year, I said, screw this. And I moved back up to Waterloo to attempt to finish my undergrad. Then, so now we've got September, I'm in Waterloo 92. And by November, I was like, for the first time in my life, I did not have anything called athletic direction. I wasn't working towards anything. So my roommate at the time said, why don't you come and try some boxing with me? And the thing is, I had a friend who I had met 5 years prior who had been trying to get me into boxing 5 years prior. But I'm like, man, he just wanted me to do it because, at least I thought he only wanted me to do it because he was doing it. And it's like, no, I don't have to follow you. Next thing you know, I end up trying it. And I walked into Grand River Boxing Club. And there was this sweet old man who went off and said, hi, this is my gym. How may I help you? I was like, well, I'd like to try some boxing. He goes, how would you like to compete? I'm like, sure. And the rest was history. He, William Leslie Longmire, may he rest in peace. He was a great man, a huge heart, did a lot for the community, did a lot for fighters, did a lot for me. I was only with him for a couple of years, um, like 3, 4 years, but he definitely left a lasting impression on me. So that was my beginnings.
In general, to play soccer, you just need a ball. To box, you just need a pair of boxing gloves, I presume. But you've mentioned before, you support headgear in the pros, right? So there must be other equipment that's needed if you want to move from, say, boxing for the heck of it or for the fun of it into more of a professional level of boxing.
Well, it's not so much that I support professionals competing with headgear because I've only known the sport as without headgear, and more so that it is the amateur game is light years different than the professional game, almost to a point where it easily could be called a different sport. Um, the rules of engagement are different. The In the amateur game, you're looking for points, so it doesn't really. You don't need power, not a great deal of power at least. You need a scoring blow. Just needs to be able to jar ahead. Whereas in the pros, power shots count for so much more in the way of um, controlling the action, dominance, and good blows, sort of thing. Um, when it comes to the pro game, also there's usually a great deal of time in between fights, especially in today's day and age, as to how boxing works. There's a great deal of time between fights. Yesteryear, have like 4 15-round fights in a month, which is unbelievable. Over and above that, he'd be sparring to prep for these fights. Is just a tremendous amount of trauma. And today the champions, if they fight 3 times in a calendar year, is a lot. That gives the brain a great deal of time to actually heal, as long as they're not solely sparring in between the fights. So when it comes to the pros wearing headgear, I don't know if it's necessarily necessary, but it's more than necessary when it comes to the amateur game. By all means, amateur games, you can be fighting first and foremost in a tournament. You may have several fights in a tournament within a short period of time, like sometimes within a weekend. You may have 4 fights, and without headgear, greater chance for cuts. That's all that headgear is actually protect you from. It doesn't slow down anything when it comes to concussions. So it will minimize cuts. Like as an amateur, I had almost 80 fights and I was never cut once. I had a goose egg once, but never cut once. As a pro, on the other hand, I've been cut 3 different fights. 3 different fights. So with that, I think that it's more than necessary in the amateurs, and I find it absolutely ludicrous to see that the powers that be are actually entertaining this notion of taking it out of the amateur game simply because of that scenario. A tournament would end. It's very easy in that scenario without headgear for the very best in the tournament to be eliminated in the first round due to a cut, not because of ability, but a cut. I think it's just nonsense.
Let me ask you this. Is it expensive in terms of acquiring a manager or a team to support your migration up the ranks from an amateur to a professional so that you're not sitting idle, you're actually boxing quite regularly? Is it expensive?
So for the athlete or for the promotional team?
How do you migrate from just an ordinary guy who enjoys boxing, whether on an amateur level or a local professional level? Because you're going to need serious management. You're going to need to be seen by the big boys. So it's going to cost you money to get from tournament to tournament. And I know you've gone to training camps in different parts of the world. You've been in different tournaments, but you pay for that yourself? Or if when you get signed to a management company or a promotion company, do they pay and your life becomes a little bit easier? How expensive is it for you?
For the most part, it's as a professional athlete, you don't pay for anything. Your team is compensated, at least in my scenarios, has always been compensated via a percentage of my purse. I once had an agent who took 10%, and then at the time when I had the agent, my coach took another 10%. I've had a coach that wanted 15%, and I never would go any higher than that. When it comes to making a migration from the pros to from the amateurs to the pros, virtually anyone can do it. Put your name into find a promoter, tell them that you are interested in fighting, get your license, and you're off to the races. Are you destined to be successful in that scenario? Well, not really. There's a lot of moving parts in the pro game. A lot of moving parts. In the way of what a manager is supposed to do. Actually, this is a very good question, because for the most part, most amateur athletes turning pro have absolutely no concept as to what the manager's job actually is. And there's a lot of parasites in this game. A mega load of parasites in this game. So at the end of the day, you're hearing it, maybe hearing it first here, and that's unfortunate if you are. But what a manager is supposed to do is supposed to create an environment so as you, the talent, do not have to think about anything, have any kind of distractions other than training. So what does that mean? The manager goes off and plots your course, finds the opponents, sometimes has to pay for the opponents, especially in your early career. They will find you the tomato cans, the journeyman, the 50-50s, right? And your job is to be in top shape and destroy them. You're supposed to go through them like a hot knife through butter. In the event that you are fed a journeyman and he goes a distance, that's a black eye on you. That's not what's supposed to happen, and people start questioning exactly how much of a prospect are you. A manager's supposed to go off, and if there's any adverse costs to acquiring these opponents, they too are supposed to cover that. You don't ever find out about any of that. You get told when your fight is, and that's it. Your coach is then informed by your manager as to your opponent, what they are. They are, as a trainer, they should be studying your opponent. Southpaw, aggressive, southpaw, elusive, southpaw, counterpunching. All these things your coach is supposed to know, and then he's supposed to tailor your workout, your training session, your preparation for your next opponent accordingly. Because those three opponents that I just mentioned, there's should be three different strategies. Now the luck of the draw is finding competence in all the areas, and wow, that's beyond difficult. So, but that's it.
So then, is it a benefit that there are so many belts, titles, championships all around the world for the average boxer to compete for, or is it a detriment to the sport overall to be that confusing?
No, I think it's an absolute benefit in that it gives so many more people the opportunity to make so much more money. Back in the days of Ali and actually Ali and prior, you'd have a belt. There was the WBC belt, and sorry, the WBA belt. The WBA belt was it. That was it. If you were that champion, that was it. Who was the champion? What's called Muhammad Ali was supposed to have two belts. And then he gave Frazier and someone else. One was seen as the champ. No, the person who had the belt was actually recognized as a world champion simply because, well, Muhammad Ali had to vacate the belts because of the whole draft dodging scenario. And then when he was allowed to fight, when he was allowed to be a champion, there was like people were going off and saying, well, you're not the real champion because Ali's here. The reality still remains. When you fight for a belt, there's a minimum salary that your the fighter, the champion, must receive. So it gives a lot more people a lot more opportunities to actually make money. Otherwise, the whole nonsense that happened between Mayweather and Pacquiao, if that was to precipitate across the board, like nobody would get the chance. These guys are going off and hogging the belt and whatnot. But yeah.
So what's your opinion then of the four belt unification?
I think it's sensational. I think it's sensational in the sense that you really could build it up. Four belts unification, it was done beautifully in the cruiserweight division with Alexander Usyk coming out on top. They had all the big boys, all the belt, all the champions are dumped into an 8-man tournament. You can't ask for much more than that. And then I think for the sport and for history, Usyk going off and relinquishing all the belts and going up to heavyweight actually was a benefit, because now they can do it all over again. And they can scramble around, and the individual belts can build their own champion, and then build a rivalry. It gets people talking. It gets fantasy boxings happening, what have you. Who would win over this? Who would win over that? That's exactly what's happening at 140. You have Crawford and Spence, but then you also have Pacquiao still there, and all sorts of people are still there, and people are like going, yeah, we're excited to find out exactly what happens. Which champion is going to be a champion? So then the unification scenario it is amazing to watch if done properly.
And the flip side of amazing to watch is when we have what you've often called robberies. So are there any solutions to bad judging these days?
I have quite a few. Personally, I have quite a few, yeah. In the amateur ranks, we're in 2021. Why not put all 5 judges in the international competitions to sit there with a GoPro on their forehead? At the end of the day, once the GoPro's done, once the fight's done and all the video feeds have been collected, in the event that there's anything called a robbery, you go off and you get another panel of independent judges, go off and watch not the fight via TV or video, but watch the GoPro, watch the individual GoPro. And then once you do that, and they can go off and say, we saw this fight completely different. And it's one thing to go off and say, you know what, I scored it a 2-point difference. Well, okay, so there's human error. But if you see something like 15-point difference, yeah, that judge then has to be reprimanded. You'd find so much less corruption with that one scenario right there. There's not enough accountability for your errors. And that's why so much stupidity happens.
So is it possible then in that scenario, prior to the referee announcing the winner in the ring, that the judge's decision is provided to the corners, and if the corners disagree, if they think there's a bad judgment call, they can say, I want to challenge the judges and go to the GoPro decision?
Not enough time. Not enough time. The overall operations of the event, both in the amateurs or the pros, it would never fly. You'd have a scenario where a show would take hours. I think that it has to play out the way it does, and then post fight, you go off and you actually put in a petition, and then behind closed doors and all that's done, and then you go off and they have to reverse if they have to reverse the title, the decision, to reverse the decision. No harm, no foul to the individual athletes. Reverse the decision and penalize the hell out of the judge for being a damn twit.
So you're not saying reverse the decision like an anti-doping type decision where a month or two later, the belt is taken away from that winner because of a bad decision and given to the other fighter? Is that what you're saying?
Literally, it wouldn't take that long to put together a panel. You could have them already set up, or maybe a week later, and it's only a couple hours, even an hour. Go off, watch it, make your assessment. Done.
So what's your opinion these days about should we have a YouTube belt?
Hell no. This thing, no. this nonsense has to stop.
Well, they're
Nobody.
making $20 million a shot.
This is insanity. Nobody would watch. Absolutely, positively, unequivocally, no offense whatsoever. But Graham, if you were to go off and play your son in basketball, I don't care how many followers you have on YouTube. No one's watching, and no one's caring. You could talk trash all you want. No one cares. Why is it any different in boxing? This is nonsense. I saw a meme today, literally today, where Canelo Alvarez was condemning Mayweather fighting Jake Paul. And I couldn't agree more. It's like this is to the detriment of the sport. You're not advancing the sport in any which way, shape, or form. The things that Mayweather did advance the sport, but he fought competent fighters. These guys aren't competent. These guys aren't competent at all. When Mayweather fought Conor McGregor, and Conor McGregor walked away with $100 million in his first professional or first boxing fight. I don't know if he had an amateur career, but it didn't look like much. That was an insult in its own right. How many champions? How many? Marvin Hagler is arguably, for the longest time for me, he was arguably the greatest or second greatest middleweight of all time. He didn't make $100 million in his career. And McGregor made it in one fight. How's that not a slap in the face? His contribution to boxing history is legendary. Who is McGregor in boxing? Right? Now you have somebody even less capable, like this Jake Paul, going off and making $20 million. Are you kidding me? No, the world's upside down. This YouTube nonsense. One part of me is like says it has to stop, but then the other part is like you can't hate on people making their money. So do you, but call it something else. It's not. It doesn't help boxing whatsoever.
So given that there's only a handful of serious decision makers in the world of boxing today,
Yeah.
how are we going to change? What are your recommendations for change? Like, seriously, how do we put the money back into the hands of the talent and their teams that surround that talent, by the way? Because you've said it's not just the boxer. The boxer has a coach, he has a trainer, he has a manager, he has an agent, he has a promoter. So there's a whole bunch of people that take a slice of the pie. And so that there needs to be a big money payoff at the end of the day. It's going to come through pay-per-view, but how are you going to change the mindset of those handful of guys who control the industry right now, who make their money putting on one show every couple of months featuring a couple of the well-known fighters?
The sport of boxing hasn't changed, hasn't evolved much since, at least in the production of the sport, in over 120 years. It pretty much is still the same. It's in like equation. You get in a promoter, he gets two fighters together, he puts a little bit of money in their pocket, but then he makes a whack load of money off of viewership.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worked. No one's ever complained about it. Done. What I think the next step evolution is a league. A league, much like the NBA, NHL. You need to have what's called a franchise owner who pays them a salary as opposed to a purse. And once that changes, then all of a sudden, everybody can eat. You can have, you can control the playing field a hell of a lot better. People can be more compensated, more evenly compensated for their contributions to the sport. You don't play boxing. It's a cliche now to say such. You don't play boxing. People put their lives at great risk, or at least could, participating in a boxing match. They should be compensated.
So the answer is to take it out of the hands of these few people making critical decisions. In other words, they're controlling 80% of the revenue streams for 20% of the boxers. And there's a whole number, from what I can tell, from all these talk shows we've been doing, even historically, when you present it in a historical perspective, when you're talking about fighters going at it at Yankee Stadium, 50 odd years ago, to being broadcast around the world, whether you're talking Ali Frazier, to nowadays being streamed online and tons of money being made left, right, and center, there has to be some kind of milieu of activity, confluence of activity right now, where we can rattle the heads of those 6 or 7 fellas and say to them, hey, man, something's got to change. Something's got to give. On one hand, okay, fair enough. We've got a whack of belts out there. We've got a whack of titles. Every single territory has its own little system, if you will, of promoting their boxers, and they can only get so high because of these handful of fellas who control the industry. So in my humble opinion, that's what has to change. There has to be a revolution. You know, you talk about a revolution. Remember when the NHL, I don't know if you do or not, was controlled? They had 6 teams, the original 6,
Yeah.
and those guys were very, very wealthy people who paid the players, the hockey players, a little bit of money because the hockey players love playing hockey and they would play it for free.
Yep.
But ultimately, as time went on, the players realized, hey, man, we're the reason the fans are coming out to these games, not you, the owner. So let's have a bit of that revenue share going on. So it's starting to happen. I think that's what the pay-per-view, and I think that's what streaming is doing. It's showing the owners of these. Yeah,
A bit. In essence, you have what you're seeing a lot more of is the individual fighters are becoming promoters themselves.
Right.
And they're recognizing that once you get to a certain level, you don't need a promoter to actually promote. You promote yourself, and you take the lion's share. You take the lion's share, and then this lion's share over and above it. Mayweather, the money team. Pacquiao has a promotional team. Golden Boy has one. Joe Calzaghe had one. They're all cashing in. They all recognize that they're bigger than the promoter now because they can do the job of the promoter. Plus, they already have the talent themselves. That concept is going to be a little bit hard to fade away because people are pretty much looking out for numero uno.
And having said that, are all of Golden Boy's fighters fighting? Are all of Top Rank's fighters fighting? Those guys have massive stables. And
No,
are all those fighting?
No, and the thing is, that's the difficulty because at the end of the day, if you think about it, to have a stable of even 50 fighters is a lot. Is an actually exceptional amount. There's a group here in Canada called Group Yvon Michel, and I still say that they do it right. They're the number one promotional team company in Canada. They have created the most world champions of any promotional team. But when they opened up, they signed some 50 some. I think the number is 52. Don't quote me on that. It was like 52, 56 fighters. And then they built them all up to where they're now all on the precipice of at least a North American title. And when that happens, or at least a good deal of them were up for that, well, then all of a sudden, now it got way too expensive. Way too expensive. There's so many up there, and now they're jostling for the big paydays and whatnot. Well, he ended up having to have them fight each other off, and everyone started getting losses, and that's how he was able to make ends meet. Because you just can't. Not only that, it's a question of once the money gets bigger, the fights get fewer. How do you keep everyone busy? It's one thing to have a fighter at the beginning of his career, you're feeding them nothings, so they can smash through these. Like, I knew one guy who had 16 fights in his first year with Groupie Von Michel. 16 fights in his first year. Then he won the national title. And he went on from there. Now, after that, they're not fighting anywhere remotely close to that kind of frequency. They can't. There's just, and that frequency plus the higher purse, the promotional company will never sustain that. So, yeah.
So having said that, I mean, what you're talking about is in order to engage all these boxers that are on these rosters, very similar to what the National Hockey League, Major League Baseball, National Basketball Association, what these guys are doing is they're taking similarly based agents with their similarly based rosters and making them available to the highest bidder, quite frankly, and putting them onto teams where they're being paid on a regular basis to play hockey or play basketball or play baseball. And what you're saying is do the same thing for boxing.
In essence, like the structure has to be a little bit different because those are team sports as opposed to boxing, which is very much an individual sport. But yeah, give them a salary, give them a pension, but give them a salary. Give them a certain amount of fights or a duration of time with which they have to fight. X amount of fights. That is the direction I think that the sport has to go, especially for the underlings. All of a sudden,
and professionalize the judging component, and in fact enhance it and augment it by, as you're saying, GoPro or any kind of technology that can count punches just as equally as well as a human being can.
The reason why I said the GoPro is because this is what they're seeing. So this is the only thing that they're accountable for. In the event that a referee is standing in the view of the judges from the fighters, then all of a sudden and misses a shot or two, well then you can't fault that judge for not seeing it. Hence why I say, GoPro, this is what I saw. This is my vantage point. On the other side of the ring, they're watching from a completely different vantage point, and they may be able to see those punches, or they should be able to see those punches, and then they should have a different scenario. In the event that anything is called questionable, you need to You need to get an independent panel to go off and assess the fights. But to be fair to the officials, see from where they see it from.
Right.
Good evening, Mr. Orr.
4-ounce gloves.
Yeah, no. No. No.
Yeah, I think he's been beaten on that argument by many of the boxers that we've interviewed. I think one said okay, maybe, but I'm pretty sure every single boxer said no. You have too many injuries.
Precisely.
Too many injuries. All right, listen, champ. That's all the questions I really had for you, and I've brought a lot of questions forward from the audience who's watching as well, which I appreciate that as well. So thanks very much. Appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Cheers.